Hi, and welcome to the Sabbath Christian Church's online sermon. Well, the Day of Atonement is upon us. Perhaps it's time to take a look at fasting and the people who fasted in the past and in the present. Let's begin with Jesus. He didn't fast on the Day of Atonement, but he did fast. He didn't in this particular verse fast as part of atonement. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Now, we've gone into the Spirit, and we're going to go into the Spirit more, but that is God's nature within us, His character, what He is, who He is. He puts into us in our mind. It is very strongly language in all of its aspects. So He's led into the wilderness. Now, the wilderness is not such a great place to go into, particularly, unless one is into that kind of thing, exploring the valleys and mountains of desolation and whatnot. But the way the wilderness is put there gives you pause. And after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he became hungry. Yes, so would everyone. Let's examine the meaning of definition. Now, we could do the Greek and definition of fasting. Interestingly, fast is a negative of eat. So it says, eating is the base word, and then non-eating, not eating in English. But that's the way the Greek does it. It has a prefix or prefix. It means to abstain from food for religious reasons, particularly. There's a time of fasting, like atonement. There's the act of fasting. And to fast is to voluntarily abstain from food as a dedication to God. We don't fast just for fasting, although some say that there are healing aspects to fasting. It's mentioned someplace around in medical treatment. But it's basically a sign toward God. It's an action related to God and our relationship with Him and the way that He wants to respond to His way. It's also a sign of mourning. James and Foster and Brown talks about fasting is depriving the body of nourishment as a sign that one is experiencing great sorrow. So that's one thing here, a sign of mourning. It's further expressed in weeping and lamentation and putting on sackcloth and ashes, not necessarily atonement. He who fasts claims to afflict himself or his soul is in a person. One could fast on behalf of another. We'll see some of this. The psalmist fasted for his enemies during their illness or siege. The fast most often lasted back at those days, aside from atonement, which is a holy day, and it goes the 24 hours from sunset to sunset. Was to get to sunrise to sunset. I lost my place. One also fasted to gain attention from God on behalf of his suffering and sickness. Okay, medical reasons. Another occasion for fasting was making a critical decision following an anonymous course of action. Esther intended to seek the king's favor and, reversing the decree of Haman, placed herself under the king's mercy, and possible wrath would end in her death. So she took a chance there. She requested the Jews to fast as well and entreat God for her mission. Nehemiah fasted in the same way in a different situation, but for the same kind of reason, to protect the people. An individual could intercede in supplication and fasting for an entire nation. Daniel did that. Gabriel answered his prayer and assured him of the ending of the captivity and promised the establishment of a new covenant a couple of years hence, obviously. And it doesn't have to be for a whole nation. People can fast for others in particular that need help one way or another. Daniel says, while I was still in prayer, Gabriel came to me, and he said, Daniel, I have come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you begin to pray, an answer was given. So God already answered his prayer as he began that. God already answers the fast, even as a person begins it. Now, certain days were they call national fasting, and the most prominent is the Day of Atonement. Leviticus says it is a solemn rest for you. A Sabbath of solemn rest, highest solemn rest, and not any more or less, except in their aspects, than any other of the holy days. That you may humble your souls is a permanent statute. It's not something that's going to change. The New Testament is not going to come along and say, well, atonement, but it was not mentioned and so forth. Humble your souls. It doesn't say fasting there, but we have learned that's what the humble part is by way of fasting, not eating. Fasting in itself did not cause Yahweh, the Eternal One, the only God, to turn to his people. He did not, just because they fasted. A true fast, very important, is to indicate that people are intent on seeking righteousness, as I said before, which included taking care of the poor and needy and other things. Jeremiah says, when they fast, I am not going to listen to their cry when they offer burnt offerings or anything else. Rather, I'm going to make an end of them by sword, famine, and pestilence. So just fasting by rote, to do it that way, is not the answer. Say to the people of the land, when you fasted and mourned the 5th and 7th months for 70 years, was it actually for me that you fasted? God says to them, of course not. An interesting thing about the fasts of the people, the major fasts of the people, Moses and Jesus, there was a kind of fast over the earth when God brought the flood during the time of Noah, who was floating away on the ark. And it fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. The flood purged the earth. Fasting purges a person, also makes a person more righteous, more capable of doing God's way. Jesus fasted. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward hungered, and his situation of hunger apparently was unfelt during the 40 days, coming only at their close, as also apparently says of Moses. And he did not eat when he wrote the command. He did not eat or drink when he received the 10 Commandments. Elijah also. Mark's statement says he was in the wilderness 40 days tempted of the demon, being 40 days tempted of the demon. So I really didn't think about this before, but it's true that Jesus was tempted not just at the end of the fast, but during the fast, just as the first stage. And he eventually, after his baptism, and God said, this is my beloved son, he adopted him at that point, to dislodge his breast from the consciousness of his sonship. He continued on his fast for the 40 days, and the second stage was when he was tempted by the 3 major things. All the other things of the temptation were not even mentioned, but that he was. Also in the wilderness, they also suggest here by Luke that he was with the wild beasts. It was a horrible situation, this fast. Fast is not something to enjoy. Someone suggested that they add a kind of terror to his solitude. And I aggravate the horror of those things. Here he is with these animals around, vicious beasts, and the most vicious beast of all being the demon. So, Jesus did all these things as a representative of God, as his high priest, and all other things. And when we do this, we also agree with Jesus and follow his way. When we fast, as the many before, for the righteousness of good deeds, we also represent to all people our Father in heaven as his sons and daughters, so they could see in us the true nature of God. Amen. And thank you for watching and listening.